Mike, a great question, but I am honored actually to be on a panel with a sister who wants to be a teacher. So do not let this child leave this room before we make sure that she commits to becoming a teacher, and not just a teacher in Oak Park River Forest High School, but right back here in Chicago. So we got you. It's not too bad. I have about 23 more years and 5 months before I can retire. We'll get there. Exactly. Micah brings up a really good question in terms of, the CTU's responsiveness to, quite frankly, the people that we service. Here's one of the challenges. Here's one of the failures of unions, that we have not made the connection to the work that we do to the people that rely upon us. And I think that's something that the CTU had to be very reflective in. That yes, we've been responsible for these failures. If you thought it was bad with what the Postal Services did in terms of their push for reform, you have, for years the union has been being complicit with these so-called reform measures that were literally undermining the public institutions. And so we had to be self-critical of that. I think the next thing that we had to do, not only admitting that failure, was then to be honest about the conditions in which the people who we're servicing are living in. It's a constituency, you all, that we cannot be afraid of because they're living it. I think the brother's testimony from the great continent of Africa is very telling, because there's a report that you all picked up, The Truth in Black and White. There's another report that the CTU produced. And so again, I think Tracy mentioned this as well. We have to really push research-driven solutions. There's a report that released a year ago called The Schools That All Students or All Children Deserve. And in that report, we called the Chicago public school system an apartheid system. And for a lot of people get nervous, right? Because when you say black and you say poverty, you automatically think of Uganda or South Africa or Kenya. You don't think about Inglewood or Austin or North Lawndale. But it turns out that the conditions in which our folks are living in are very much a parallel to brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa. And so once we begin to actually say that language out loud and be unapologetic about it, it turns out that the very people who are experiencing an apartheid education system, we're saying, finally someone's saying it. As far as our own rank and file members, yeah, there's a process in which we have to work with rank and file members to be more at ease with that type of language. It's not a matter of them being convinced that it exists. It's a matter of, how comfortable are we actually calling it out? And so as a result of calling that out, it wasn't enough to just say this stuff is racist, how you're treating black people and poor people is awful, this is an apartheid structure. We actually had evidence to support that. Austerity has translated into 160 schools in Chicago without libraries, 100 schools without playgrounds, schools without cafeterias, again, losing black teachers over and over again, which overwhelmingly the black teachers that we were losing were black women in particular. And so as we begin to lay out the fact that we only have 202 nurses for a school system, 300 counselors for 15,000, 17,000 homeless students, as you lay that information out there, there's only so much you can say to try to defend that. Seriously. And so, truthfully, there is no argument for it. And so, as unionists, the people, as Max said it very well, and just the parallel between how they're doing postal the services in schools is quite alarming. But we have to be able to connect with the people that we're servicing. The reason why we had over 70%, particularly of black and brown parents that supported our strike, is because we actually spoke to the very issues in which they were desperately crying out for someone to say. And we can't not be afraid as unionists, again, to not just talk about labor, but deal with the civil rights issues of today.
Well, I think Brandon summarized things very well. So let me do what I do, which is I'm an organizer, and we're here and we're becoming educated and kind of more aware of various struggles that we share. So we cannot leave this room and go back to our lives and our jobs. We need to build power. We need to one by one build a movement that cuts across these lines, that reaches out to the people that we serve. If you're public service workers or teachers, we need to talk to our neighbors. We need to get involved, and there are opportunities before us. There is an event on Sunday, and we need to be there, and we need to be there in great numbers. There's an event on Wednesday, and we need to stand up for the schools that our kids deserve, right? And we need to be building and educating and organizing and building power. And I want to say, just one word, we have to look at all these decisions being made by the people in power. Let's ask ourselves these questions, who benefits, who sacrifices, and who decides? And we have to be the decision makers now. We have to step up, we have to build our power, we have to make our voices heard. Also, there is going to be an initiative, I just mentioned this very specifically, because part of it is like the money, like who's got the money? There's going to be legislation in Springfield that's going to say we should close all the corporate tax loopholes, raise $2 billion. Let's not force people to say, well, do we pay people's pensions or pay for education? That's bull. That's false choices. We need to make sure the people who can afford that they pay, that the people who need the services, that they get the services they need. So let's not sit back. The lessons we've learned is that when we work together, when teachers go on strike, their voices can be heard, they have power, they can make a difference in lives, not only in their lives, but in the lives of their students. And AFSCME learned that when we build power, that we can make a difference not only in the lives of those workers and the standard of living, but the people that we serve, right? So let's all work together to make sure that we do what we can tomorrow, on Sunday, on Wednesday, every day to make this city and this state and this country a more just and equitable place. That's our job, that's our responsibility. It's about talking with people, engaging people, stepping up and taking action. Let's reach higher, let's act like we've never have before, let's make a difference in our lives. Thank you.
I just want to mention in closing, we talked about how the Postal Service and how these entities were trying to destroy the Postal Service by tacking on this financial burden. Well, as more people have become aware, they kind of shifted the focus, and unfortunately they're using our Postmaster General to undermine the service by cutting service. The Postal Service is just that. It is a service. We don't sell anything. We don't sell smartphones. We don't do anything other than to provide service. So anytime there are cuts in service, it intricately impact another part of the service. If you cut Saturday service, of course, there's going to be a loss in revenue. And then, as the Postmaster General himself said, in 15 years, who knows, we may be down to 3 days. And what we're looking at is, and Melissa alluded to it earlier, is the loss of jobs that's associated with it. Across the country, African Americans make up 20% of the workforce of the United States Postal Service. Ladies, females, make up 40% of the workforce of the United States Postal Service. Over 40% of the workforce across the country are Hispanic and Asian and African Americans. 30%, second only to the Department of Defense, is our veterans work for the United States Postal Service. And the domino impact of that is when you take away these middle-class jobs, what do they have? You have what we hear about what's going on in the community. There's a void in the community right now because of the lack of work in the community. You're taking away jobs out of communities that are already deprived. Recently I had the opportunity, and, interestingly enough, I think Brad alluded to it earlier, the fact that we have to challenge even those who appear to be on our side, hold those people accountable. We're looking at the Republicans, the right wing, the Tea Party. Sometimes we got to remind Democrats, damn it, that you're Democrats. So Recently I had the opportunity on behalf of the NALC, and it has been an argument that I've been making from day one about the impact in our community, because quite naturally you look around Chicago and you think the Postal Service look like what it looks like in Chicago. But those of us who've been to conventions, you go to that convention floor, the post office don't look like this across the country. In fact, you can see Chicago, you can see the dot in the middle of the room of what represents Chicago. But I had an opportunity to go on behalf of the NALC with a few other African Americans from across the Congress, across the country, to talk to senior staffers of the Congressional Black Caucus. And, it was ironic or odd to me that I have to sell them on or connect the dots for them of the impact in our community. So literally what I done, now the day before, we had a rally here in Chicago, and that in itself is a story, because, we started that rally, we went to Hyde Park. The thing was that there's no bill that becomes law unless the president signed it, and we know where the president lives because we deliver his mail. And so we wanted to take this message to Hyde Park, and we wanted to challenge our president. And, in that in itself created some conflict even within our union. You know what? Are we going to do this to Obama? We can't do this to President Obama. We can't show up the president. And I'm thinking, hell, I got daughters too, just like the president. And I had this job before he became president. And at the least, I want this job after he leave office. And and I, just like our union, we supported him in 2008. We had his back in 2012 out of my own pocket. I went out to D.C. We went out to D.C. for the inauguration. So we're supporters of the president, but at the same time, we can't be afraid to speak truth to power, no matter who that power is. You see the LGBT community, they supported the president, but what they do, they challenged the president, and what happened? His thinking evolved. You look at those who are tied to the immigration issue. I recall when the president got elected 4 years ago, there was this round table of all these black leaders meeting on the south side of Chicago State University, espousing about what we need to do as a community. But in D.C., there was busloads and thousands of those on Capitol Hill, making their voices heard, talking about the immigration issue. Now everybody's thinking is evolving, even the Tea Party, on the immigration issue. We have to be just as vocal when it comes to labor. Labor is not a bad word, damn it. Unions is not a bad word. I really wish you all could have seen, I put them on the spot every time I tell this story. We had a fundraiser here for our friend in Congress, Congressman Bobby Rush. And we were in there, and we were talking to the congressman. Tony with the UAW was in there, and we're standing by the window, and we're talking about how we need to network. And he'd look out the window, his brother almost choked on his coffee. He said, I'll be damned if he driving a Lexus. That's not an American-made car. How the hell he in here asking for our money, and he drive? He said, hold up a minute, let me tell him something. But that's the passion that we have to have. You're absolutely right. You're in there talking to us about what you can do for us. You lead by example. You can't be afraid to talk about unions. You can't be afraid to speak for those who don't have. Because as I stated earlier, it's those at the bottom rung of the ladder who's losing this class war. It's those at the bottom. So when you're talking about class warfare in the United States, it's inherently you're talking about racism. Because there's those who are black and brown and Asian. There's those who are at the bottom of the ladder. So, we have to fight on. We have to fight together. And again, I thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight.